Hey, this is Mosquito, also known as Chris. Welcome to the shop. This is my new planer. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of run through all this, figure out exactly what I need to do to make it look like this, because it certainly does not. Well, it does now, because I'm shooting this afterwards, but it won't in a second here. So anyway, so what I'm going to do here is I've actually got a couple of things planned. I have one big long video, which is this one. So if you feel like watching the whole thing start to finish, have that kind of attention span, don't blame me if you don't, that would be this one. There's going to be chapters so you can kind of scrub through and see whatever you want to see. However, I'm also going to link down in the description or up in a card here to give you the video or the playlist of videos that is going to be kind of all chopped up. So it'll kind of be basically the chapters and then just something that'll be a lot easier to kind of click through. Chop it up into, like, I don't know, 8 to 15 minute videos depending on what section it is, and that'll be a lot easier to navigate. So anyway, without further ado, we will kick it. Today I'm going to start kind of putting some pieces of a planer back together. It's been torn apart, strewn about the shop, and just starting to get to the point where I can start putting some of its pieces together. I did all the disassembly off camera because that was a lot of just kind of show up in the shop and then just do as much work as I could, do a bunch of parts labeling, and then put it away. But I have a few more pieces, the legs and the top main casting, that I need to be cleaned up still, and then I'll paint those. And I'm just sort of putting some of the pieces back together to get a fewer pieces just kind of hanging around. So yeah, let's go ahead, kick some of that off. One of the things I've been working on with this planer restoration is the motor, and I did get it all painted. I have already taken it apart, put brand new bearings in it, put it back together, kind of cleaned everything out a little bit, primed it, painted all the pieces, and I've got some new hardware for it. I already replaced all of the electrical cabling, so it's got a new cable, new plug, it'll have a new switch, so that's ready to rock. So now all of this is dry. I've got some new hardware, and I'm going to start putting it together. So everything that I got for new hardware is actually stainless steel, and I went with button head but hex drive just because I think they look a little bit nicer. I actually had to get a new motor fan too, because the one that came with this one was broken. It was missing a number of blades on it, so I was able to track down one that I could make work. Ended up having to drill out the bore on it because it was supposed to be for a D shaft motor, and mine is round, so I just used a Forstner bit of the right size and drilled it out. And then there's a little spring holder on it that's supposed to kind of keep it where it's supposed to be, and luckily drilling that out, and everything seems to be pretty happy. One thing I do want to check before I get too far, I did scrape off some of the paint on the inside where the ground connects, but I just wanted to make sure that we actually have ground, because that would be annoying. So that works. Alright, so if I go somewhere like from the shaft of the motor to ground pin, perfect. So I've got connection all the way from ground pin to something that should be grounded. So we are good to go there. Certainly wouldn't want 220 volts of non-grounded fun going somewhere I wasn't planning on it. So we'll get that electrical box cover on. Next up is motor fan cover. don't exactly know how I feel about installing star washers into brand new painted surfaces, but it's what it was originally, and I'm going to keep it that way. So with the amount of vibration from an electric motor, you certainly wouldn't want it to have any problems. All right, and the fan, everything is clear. Perfect. All right. Easy enough. So this was it's like a printed tag that's supposed to look metal. It's kind of like a goldish color, which I don't really like. I was thinking about seeing if I could either find like a replication of a motor tag like this, or I might see if I can either like do like a vinyl cutter and make one on just a generic piece of metal, silver probably, and then it was just originally glued on, stuck in place. So that's what I intend to do. I just don't really want to put this back on it, knowing that it's kind of ugly. So anyway, that is more or less the motor put back together with the new stainless steel hardware. And again, I just have to wait on getting the other side of the bracket that'll mount the switch, and then I can put the switch back together. But the switch itself just uses some spade connectors on here. So spade connectors on the wires, spade connectors on there, really nothing too special to that. So it'll just be throw it all together. Cool. One piece put back together. So I've already started working on putting some of this gearbox back together. I got brand new bearings in both sides. I've installed a couple of the shafts already, or all three of the shafts, I guess, in one side, and then all of the gearing. So that should be pretty much ready to go. Otherwise, for this, all I'm doing now is essentially waiting on the actual cutter head, and we should be able to get this thing put back together the rest of the way. All right, so this is kind of the interesting side of the gearbox so far, and that is the side with all the gears. So there's 3 bearings under each of these, and I don't want to take this one off because there's a little spring with a ball in there, which is actually a little bit annoying to get in, but there's a little yoke here that goes all the way through, and then you can kind of see this top one also has a shaft that comes through. So this is actually what gets driven, whether it's through the pulley or the gear. I'm pretty sure this is a gear from or a sprocket from the chain. And then this shaft here, there's a little ball end that goes on it. And what you do is you can use that for basically engaging and disengaging. And you're supposed to do this while it's running because these are helical gears, so obviously they won't mesh unless they're spinning very well anyway. And so when you push that lever up, it will push this whole gear up and disengage everything. That's actually way too far. It only goes up to about there. That's where the bearing seats. So then now you can see that this will freewheel. So essentially, if for whatever reason you needed to stop the machine, say like, I don't know, if you saw a chunk of metal that was coming into it or something, or if you were just taking off way too much, or who knows. I've never personally needed to stop my planer partway through, but hey, if you need to, this is how you would do it. So then the other part of it is there's a gasket. I did peel off the old one. It almost looked like it was gasket maker rather than gasket and gasket sealer, but I ordered some just regular kind of synthetic paper gasket material that was good for oil, as well as gasket sealer for both sides of it. But then I actually went to Grizzly, and they still have some planers that are very similar to this one, and so I just decided to pick up one of their gaskets, and it says I shouldn't need to seal either side of it. It's kind of a much more of a rubber, so I'm hoping that that'll just work. So that's what I'm going to go with for now. If it doesn't work, well, I guess we'll end up back in it and replacing it with a different gasket with gasket sealer. Who knows? Maybe I'll end up using the gasket sealer eventually. But basically, flip that in there. There's going to be 2 bearings. There's a third bearing this is the bearing here that I can't install yet. Or I guess I could install the bearing, but I also have to install the cutter head, and I'm getting a new cutter head and it's coming with the bearings, so I don't have the bearing yet. I have to put it in here, and then I can put this one in, and there's a little washer with a screw that holds this one in place. And then I'll be able to put this thing back together. But for now, that's about all I can do. Alright, so this is the other side of the gear housing, and I've got the replacement bearing in here. There's a little washer and a socket cap screw that will hold that in its place. And then on the opposite side, I have the new oil seal put in place. And it needed a new one because I got a new cutter head in, finally. So, new cutter head for it. It's a helical head, and it actually has a smaller shaft on the end of it, diameter, than what the original had. So it required a new oil seal, which came with that, as well as the bearings. So that's actually why I ended up not being able to install that bearing until I got the cutter head in, because it came with it. Alright, next thing will be to actually install the cutter head. Is this a little bit janky? Oh, heck yeah. It's not held in there very tight, but the way I have the clamp set up, the jaws are obviously a lot wider on the back than the front, so it kind of holds it back just against the workbench. And it's got one of the boards that it shipped with, along with a pine board underneath it. And the gearbox goes onto this end of the shaft, so I will be able to kind of drive that home, since I don't really have any better, quote-unquote better way of holding it. And then this little block I cut a little notch out of, and that's for seating the bearing, and that's just so I can get over that little washer that secures it in place. Okay, so as you can see, the bearing is down, or I should say the shaft is all the way seated, and there's kind of that cutout there, and that matches the bottom of this. So we just install that on there. So that goes there, and then we run the screw in down through that end of the cutter head. Hold up. So yeah, this part right here, a little bit glossed over that, but it's actually not quite as simple as that, just reinstalling it. It would be on the Delta. I know from at least one person that installed the same cutter head on the Delta that this does in fact fit just fine. But the problem that I ran into is that it's actually a little bit narrower here on my cutter head. So right here, it's a little bit narrower. And that was a problem. So I actually had to file mine a little bit wider. This was an attempt from buying one from Grizzly that didn't quite work out, because the right number of splines, wrong direction. So anyway, what I had to do is I just took a file and opened these up. I counted my strokes to make sure that I was taking off about the same on each side, using digital calipers to make sure that these were the same thickness, and then just kind of kept going until they fit. And then I could put it right in there where it belonged, and then I was good to go. So just a heads up, at least for the, whatever this one is, Total Shop, that's the one. I know what I have. For the Total Shop one, this piece just kind of needs to get modified a little bit. The Deltas, like I said, should be fine, so that might be something that you have to check, but it's a super, super easy fix. So anyway, that's what I had to do for that. And so I have this set of gears is already in place, and then I've got the one on the end of the cutter shaft, or the shaft of the cutter head, and then I've got bearings installed in these, and I will put the front half of it on. So hopefully we'll be able to get that to seat. Got the bearings pre-installed where they need to be, and some of the other parts already in there. So let's see if we can get it on there.
All right, that was seemingly pretty easy. Seems like everything is in place for that now. And then there's just a handful of socket cap screws that will don't put it in the locating pin, that won't work. 5 of them that will hold this all in place. And I'm just making sure that with this engaged, as I'm spinning the cutter head, this shaft is slowly turning, but it's turning. And that's exactly what I need. So I'll push that back in and it'll be disengaged. Also purchased from Grizzly, because mine was all banged up, a new knob that will go on the end of that. And then I've got 4 more socket cap screws that will attach to the top here through the main casting.
Okay, so one thing with the casting on this gearbox here, the thing is that the screws that actually mount it into the main casting that come in from the top, on mine at least, those are actually drilled all the way through. So if you wanted to, you could use that same little bit of tubing and then fill through that instead. Might not be a bad idea because this is kind of a little bit of a pain in the butt. However, I'm not exactly sure if it'll work because I never tried it. So you'll probably have to leave the plug out and then, fill from the top, wait till it comes out the side, still make the same amount of mess. Might just be a little bit easier. The alternative is it might not be a bad idea to just go ahead and fill that before you install the gearbox, because that'd probably be a lot easier too. But you just kind of got to make sure that to get the level right, you kind of have it sitting level and then upright, so then you can fill it. It'll get up to the level of that plug for the fill side and then you're done. So that might be a little bit easier. I did not go that route, but oh well. So I've got one of the post lead screws for the lifting mechanism, as well as the nut, and a new bearing. And these are, anybody that's curious, 6202. And I got sealed both sides, even though they were shielded both sides for the last one. I just usually swap those out for sealed. So I've got a block of wood that I drilled a hole in. I believe it was 3/8 of an inch. That fits just over the shaft on the end of the actual post itself, or the screw. So that'll fit there, which will allow me to drive the bearing on, which I will go ahead and start now. All right, so I've got a scrap underneath it too, just to kind of, I don't know, soften it a little, even though it's MDF top. I just figured a little bit of pine wouldn't hurt anything. All right, so now that that bearing is fully seated, we can drive it into here. But first, what you need to do is install the nut, just because once this is actually pushed in there, you won't be able to get that in there. So the other key factor on this is there's a curved side on one side and a flat spot on the other. And you need to make sure that the curved side is towards the bed of the planer. So in this case, that's up, since I have this thing upside down. All right, and once that's on there, I will go ahead and drive the top bearing in. All right, so for the first part of this, I'm going to use that same block because that fits over and that'll kind of push on both parts of it. So I'll do that first. All right, and that'll only get me flush with the top. And then in this case, I've got a 15/16 3/4 drive socket, and the 3/4 drive is not necessarily that important, but the important thing is this one's got a hole in it that goes all the way through that is large enough to fit over the shaft of this thing. And the 15/16 is big enough that it'll seat on the outside race of the bearing, leaving the rest of it alone. You might be able to get away with an inch depending on what the outside diameter of the socket is, but then the one that I had gets a little bit close to being a little too tight. Like, I didn't quite like the fit, because it's got to be able to fit in one of these posts here, so you can kind of see there's a little bit of wiggle room, but the 1 inch would have been tight, and I didn't want to run the risk of jamming this in there and having to get that out. So 15/16 it is, and then I can go ahead and drive this all the way in. And the reason you have to drive that all the way in is because then there is a clip that you have to install to keep all of that in there. All right. And I've already got one installed over here, one over here, so 2 more to go. I should also probably mention that I used the wax-based lubricant, the DuPont Chain Saver, on all of these post screws and corresponding nuts, just because it's wax-based and these are open, so there's some open slots that give access to these screws so that the nut can move up and down in them. And when I was taking them apart, there was quite a lot of sawdust packed in and around everything, just chips and stuff. So I decided to go that route, hoping that maybe that would help it not quite stick as much, rather than, you know, using an oil-based kind of lubricant in there just to see if that would work. Nothing else. I figured I could always just clean them off and spray them down with either some, I like to use fluid film for a lot of stuff. I know it's not the greatest lubricant out there, but it gets the job done and it's anti-rust. So that's one of the things that I like about that. All right. All right, so this last one is just a little bit tricky, and the reason for that is because this is the one that the handle actually goes onto. So as you can see, it's got a little bit extra sticking out the top that'll need to be accommodated while you are driving it in. So if I block the bottom of it, you can see how far up that sticks. So that is why that one's a little bit different. That's awesome. All right, that is all 4 of those in place. And now I'm just kind of wiping everything on the bottom down with a little bit of fluid film, just to kind of give it a little bit of rust prevention. All right, I've already installed 2 of them, but what I am working on now is the sprockets. I used a little bit of the fluid film on the shafts here, as well as coating the sprockets earlier. So these are all cleaned up, so those just slide on. There's a key there. And then I've got a washer and a nut. And just tighten those down. Screwdriver just to hold it. I don't need to go crazy tight on that or anything. I just want to get it tight enough, I guess. And same thing on this last one. Next up will be this. I've already done fluid film on all that. Just got to do the hardware a little bit. This is actually the chain tensioning. So I'm not going to put too much effort into getting that tightened on just yet. So I mean, I'll kind of tighten it down so it doesn't wiggle too much, but it still needs to be able to slide, because what'll end up happening is the chain will come through here, so this will have to move that way in order to tension the sprocket once I get everything put in place. And I know this isn't going to be the final time that I do this chain, because I know I'm going to have to set it once I get all 4 posts so that the elevator nuts are at the right height, because quite honestly I won't be able to do that until I have the top casting at least somewhat in place, because I have to get all these nuts lined up, and right now I know they are anything but. Once I'm done messing around with it, and I'll use some more of this chain saver and just get the whole chain all kind of lubed up and protected and ready to rock. Cool. Next thing up will be these lifting bars, and they just have little C-clips that go in here that'll lock those in place. Okay, so I've got the bottom casting flipped up here, and it should be more or less ready to go, and I intend to mount it onto the base. We'll see what happens here. I put the legs on the base already, assembled and put together and ready to rock. I am waiting on a mobile base, so we'll see if this ends up having to come off. I may end up putting it on there and then realizing I really can't move it with the added weight of the legs in the other base. See, I mean, I've put some pretty heavy machines on mobile bases by myself before, so we'll just see how that goes. So once you get this over here, one of the things you have to keep in mind is if you've already installed the chain kind of goes straight across here, across the planer, and then it kind of V's in and then back. And it's this V side, there's an open thing on the base here, and that's where that goes, because there's kind of a bit of the top casting with the gearbox may, have to slip down there depending on how deep you're planing. And the important thing that I found out is that when you're installing this, you have to make sure that the sprockets fit in those 2 notches, but also that you get the chain under that center. So and then you kind of slide beyond, and then you can drop this side in, and there's 2 notches on this side for the sprockets as well. And then you can bring it back and worry about lining it up and everything else. And actually, that's pretty good for not trying. And then there's just 4 bolts that kind of lock that all in place. And the big test, I can still lift it, barely. So hopefully I'll be able to get that on the mobile base once I get that in. And then I've got the top bushing for the elevation screw. Kind of just guides it, holds it in the middle. And yet another circlip here. And on that piece, it is important to note that there's, whoops, and I just screwed it up. So with this, once you get it installed, there's a little square that's been milled out of that bushing block that I don't see anything else that lines up with it. I'm assuming is for the little screw that holds the scale in place. So the depth of cut scale goes over here in a little recess, and there's a square notch in the outside of this bushing, and I just have it lined up where the screw goes to mount the scale. All right, so these are actually pretty simple, the bed rollers. There's basically just a tube with two bearings in the end of it, and then there's those little pins, and you put the bearings into the bed rollers, or in my case, one of them came with it, the other one didn't, and then you put those pins through the main casting, and then they just seat into the inner race of the bearings, and then you just kind of pound them in, and then there's two little set screws on the top of it that will hold them in place. Pretty simple, pretty easy. One of them was back ordered, so I'm still waiting on that one, but it does get here eventually, and I put it in. I've got a couple of 2x4s in here, something to set the cutter head on once it gets in. But first, I might need the outfeed roller. No, I should be able to do that. I should be all right. Okay. That's how I took it out anyway. I took the outfeed and infeed and outfeed rollers off after the cutter head, if I'm not mistaken. So, yep. All right. So what I'm going to do is basically squeeze the cutter head in over here, lay it on the 2x4s, kind of get things lined up over there, drop my bolts in place, and then we just have to get the bearing to seat on that end and get the gearbox situated over here. All right, a little bit of a note here. So right here, I should have been actually installing the chip deflector first, and I outline all this later. I kind of go over it a little bit more depth, but for various reasons, I should have been installing the chip breaker here first, and then, well, the order after that isn't quite as important, but then I probably would have done the outfeed roller, the main cutter head, and then the infeed roller. Again, I kind of outlined that a little bit, but for those of you that don't actually watch all of it, looking at you, just keep an eye out for that. So just in case you don't, catch that part later in the video, that is a different order than what I initially set out to do, as I will show you eventually. All right. Well, there goes one bolt. Whoops. Okay. I can already see I'm going to have to trim a little bit of that gasket first, because that sticks out the side just a hair. There's one bolt that dropped. That one dropped. This one is. That one did. And that one's good. All right. Let me go ahead and tighten these up. And that'll hold the gearbox where it's supposed to be. For a second there, I looked at that and I was like, oh no, the cutter head is moved. It's supposed to be. Okay, I'm going to raise this all the way up. And I think I will do the outfeed roller next. So this one is
really hard to film. So what I'm going to do is kind of show you some of the pieces parts. So these are what hold the blocks for the feed rollers up. The in-feed and the out-feed have the same bracket. I've installed 3 of them. This is the last one. And there's just that little set screw with a lock nut on it, and that's how you raise it up to adjust the height of it. And the part that's hard to see is the rest of it. Let me go ahead and get this one installed over here while I talk about this. So there's 2 blocks on either end of the in-feed rollers that have like a little brass bushing or bronze bushing on the inside, and they kind of just free float. And the reason they free float is because then if you need to, I mean, when you feed the board in, you want to have some downward pressure, which is done with some springs that load in from the top. See, I lied. This one doesn't have brass on the inside. These are just, it's kind of a soft metal. I'm not exactly sure what type, but so these are the blocks that eventually go in here. And then these springs actually load from the top, and they kind of sit in this little recess here, and that's kind of what keeps it in place this way, side to side. And then there's also a little cap that goes up here that will be the way that you set the actual spring tension. And the interesting thing is that there's actually a hole in the top of the block that lets you oil this bearing surface. And now just keep in mind that these aren't super high speeds or anything. These are geared way down because this is what actually feeds the board through. And I think it's, I can't remember if it's 16 or 32, something like that, feet per minute. So it's not super fast, but that is essentially all there is to that. And I will get my other block here to have those ready. And the obnoxious thing is this is basically going to be a from the bottom up type of operation. So yeah, see you in a minute or two. And I did check, the gearing goes on the gearbox side. So the long shaft ends up on the gearbox side. And I can already see that I screwed this up. So I'm going to pull the blocks on these ends, because apparently I can only have one of them, or at least need to get them swung out of the way. It's funny the things that you remember after you run into them, because I remember that this is essentially how I had to install all of these as well. Okay. It actually looks like I'm going to have to take some of this off. This whole thing, I tell you. Question is whether or not that is enough. I hope it is. It seems to be. All right. Now I'll get these 2 springs down in there, and you can kind of tell when they're in there correctly because they'll kind of sink down a little bit further. There we go. And see how it kind of won't wiggle out anymore? Perfect. Now I just got to get the other one in. Now I can tighten this up again. Now before I go too far on unwrapping the cutter head, I'm going to do the in-feed roller. In-feed roller, very much the same, but slightly more accessible. Before I get too far into that, I'm going to put a little light oil down into those just to make sure that I can get those lubricated the way they should be. For this first one, I'm just going to do it straight into the top here, even though technically what you can do is just drop some oil in through the top up here, which I guess I might as well do. And then that'll kind of just gravity feed down in there and keep everything all lubed up. Oh yeah, look at that one go. These barely moved when I got the machine, so that's pretty sweet. That almost makes it feel like all this time was worth it. All right. Also, don't forget that these little plugs go on the top for holding those springs in, and then also holding the spring tension. And there's a definite top and bottom. So there is a hex on the top, just a hole on the bottom. Hole goes down. There is a hole through the hex that goes in, so you're going to keep adding oil without having to unset your spring tension every time. I might have to put a plug in these somehow, because when I took those out, I didn't know there was a hole in them until I started cleaning them and was trying to clean some of the gunk out of there. As you can imagine, oil for trying to keep the bearings happy, and then sawdust all over everywhere. Those got pretty gunked up. And I'm just going to drive these in until they're basically flush for now, and then I'll worry about in-feed and out-feed tension once I actually get this thing running, so that we can deal with getting that all squared away. That's where I thought I was, anyway. Where I am now is with the in-feed roller and its accoutrement sitting on the bench again. And the gearbox is down again. And the cutter head is out of its bearing again. So yeah, not ideal, but I learned an important lesson. When you switch this planer from the straight cutter head with the 3 knives to a helical head, segmented, this does not fit unless you do it before you install the cutter head. So that's fun. And basically, this is a chip deflector of sorts that'll chuck the chips back up this way once they come up and off, and the chute for the dust collection comes out this side. So that's what that is. It'll kind of redirect those chips back out the back of the machine. And yeah, cool. So there's a bar that will go from over there to over here that kind of threads through here that will hold that up in place. So I'm going to get that installed and then put the cutter head back in, and then it'll be a lot more obnoxious, but I'll put the in-feed roller back in, and then I'll be back to where I was 15 minutes ago. All right, this one I think we're gonna roll the time lapse for. Alright, so that was fun. Now we're back to slightly beyond where we were half an hour ago. So I've got the top chip deflector in, I've got the piece that holds that in. I did remember a little later, but in here there's a threaded rod that goes all the way through, and that comes over to this side, and it is the locking knob to lock the post in place. That actually holds the front of the chip deflector in place. So way back down in there, there's a little round part that threads all the way through. I mean, it doesn't thread, it slides all the way through. So the obnoxious thing that I didn't realize until I started doing it is that in order for that piece to be where it needs to be, these actually have to be pushed back behind that. So that actually holds those flat, so that before they kind of flipped down further than they were supposed to, but these actually get held back by that chip breaker, and so I had to, oh man, I had to mess around with it for a while just to get all of these back where they were supposed to be, so that this rod that goes all the way through would actually would actually slide through and come out the other side where it was supposed to, in a way that I could still, actually use it. So yeah, that sucked. But I guess it's a lesson learned. Alrighty, time to fill up the gearbox, and this is the fill port. Realizing that this probably would have been a little bit easier had I not installed all this stuff yet. So if you're going to be doing something along these lines, probably not a bad idea to wait to install your in-feed roller until after you've filled your gearbox. Anyway, I don't feel like taking this out, so what I'm going to do is I'm just using 80W90 gear oil. That's kind of the main thing that I was recommended. And I put this little piece of hose on it. It's like a hard plastic. It actually came from a dehumidifier. And what I'm going to do is actually sneak it down through next to the chip deflector there, and then I can feed that into there. And essentially you just fill it up until it comes out that port. So I've got paper towel here and a couple more paper towels up there that I'll be able to use to clean that up. So, and we're full. Whoop. All right, and I've just got the plug here, and I've got the yellow, well, it's white Teflon tape, but the stuff meant for oil and petroleum products. See if I can find the right sized wrench. Not that one. Should be able to tighten this down. Good news is I don't see any leaks around the gasket yet, which there is an oil seal on the inside of that. So other side of this bearing has an oil seal, and then there's an oil seal up by the cutter head, but there is obviously no oil up that far to the cutter head because that's right about here. And this is the other piece that has a little O-ring oil seal inside of here, and so far, I mean, I can see that it's not leaking there. So I guess I'm just going to let that sit for a little while, probably go play some saxophone, and come back to it and see whether or not it leaked. But now we kind of get a better picture of what this thing is going to look like when I start getting this stuff filled out. So next day, it will be starting to get some of that assembled, getting the chain drive on this end, and all those sprockets should be the next thing up, I think. Okay, so I have the 3 keys are already installed, and this is a little bit of a sort of balancing act because I kind of need to get most of them going at the same time, because I need to get the chain on there and the sprockets all at the same time. So the flange on the single sprocket goes on the in-feed roller, and the extended portion of that flange goes away from the machine. So this chain is on the back side. The double row sprocket goes with the extended portion towards the machine, because that matches with that sprocket, so that those two will get lined up. So that goes in here like so. And then the small gear goes on the output of the gearbox reduction, and that goes with the flange towards the machine. And as such, that chain goes on the outside. The truly fun part begins. And I think I'm actually going to install the small one first. So that goes down there. Since that one really doesn't like to move, I mean, it kind of moves based on the gearbox, but it doesn't move quite as easily as these ones. So that's what I'm going to do on that one. So I need to get that one on there. Let's see if I can get this one up here. That was there. That was there. That was there. That was really cool. And okay, so this one is a little bit tighter of a fit, but if you're gonna do this, I strongly recommend that you put your hand on the other side where that outfeed roller comes out on the other side. So you can see I can push it back out just to keep some of that force off the springs that are otherwise holding it in place. And then we can tighten these down. So these are just some oversized washers, and I think these ones were M6 bolts. And on my machine, so on this one, I do not have a chain tensioner. So I know some of the later model versions of this machine and like the later models of the Delta equivalent actually came with spring-loaded chain tensioners that would kind of just hold this down, so that way you had tension on this chain so that it wasn't flopping all over the place. But well, I don't have it. So there was part of me, basically you end up with like 2 screw holes somewhere up here that I could, you know, technically have drilled and tapped myself and bought a tensioning sprocket from probably Grizzly. I think they use them, but I don't know, I kind of thought if it didn't have it originally, then I'll probably just try it without and see what happens. If I decide I somehow need to add a sprocket there for tensioning, I can probably get that figured out pretty easily, and it wouldn't be that bad because there's just one cover that you take off and this end is pretty well exposed. It's the other side that would be way more obnoxious. Alrighty. So we can see that sprocket down on the bottom turning, and now we are turning in-feed and out-feed. Sweet! Good news! That random bolt that I found that I heard just fall out of the machine when I was taking some other stuff apart, I figured out what it is. It holds the cover for the chain drive in place. So that's good. That's one less mystery to try and figure out. And spare bolts. Well, spare bolts are okay. Extras afterwards, a little dicey. Okay, so this is the cover that covers up the chain drive mechanism, and on my machine there were these 2 kind of spots that were cast into this cover that were not drilled and tapped originally. However, I know that future iterations of this machine and or Grizzly machines that have this same cover had little plates that kind of cover. So there's an open section right here on the back side of the cover. So kind of like this little triangle shape here from the cover that they cover up just to keep some of the chips out of here, because this was kind of had a decent amount of sawdust on it. But this machine, and I think even the early Deltas, did not come with that. So what I did is I actually bought, they're super cheap, they're like $1 a piece. I bought the Grizzly versions, and the holes don't line up, and the ones in here are threaded. So there was a threaded hole there, and then this one was actually originally threaded, but I just drilled out some holes for what lined up with that, drilled and tapped the cover. So now these pieces will basically go in here, attach to the cover behind this, and act as a way to deflect any of the chips that try to come in from that side.
But I'm going to install the cover first. And there's 2 of these roll pins. So I took them out when I painted and put them back in, but there's 2 of them, one there, one here. And there's 2 locating holes in the top of the casting. And that's to help hold that in place where it's supposed to be. And then there's 1 bolt that goes through the middle that actually keeps that in place. There's my Allen screw. All right, so that is more or less the gearbox and drivetrain on this end done. So to kind of round out this end, I'm going to reattach the pivoting handle to the lifting wheel. So this drives the post lift mechanism. So this drives this screw that's connected by all those chains underneath, or that chain, I guess, underneath, and raises and lowers everything all at once. So there's this handle, and then there's this little up-down kind of a label, I guess, if you will, on there. And there was like a clear sticker over it, and I actually peeled that off, and then I actually just shot it with some clear coat, so that looks a whole lot better than it used to. And I do need to get a new nut for this one. I don't have one. I thought I did, but I don't have one that actually fits on this end of the shaft, so I will get one of those at some point. So that'll be on my list of things, a new washer and a new nut, just to make it look good. Because why would I want to come this far just to put a crappy nut on the top of it? So I got to try and figure out what I'm going to do. There's a little metal piece here, and that's just the indicator that goes down on the top of here. So that kind of goes right there, and it's just a way to indicate what your actual depth is on, oh, that's fun, what your actual depth is on the depth of cut scale. So I do have 2 drive screws that'll go there. I just have to figure out if I'm either going to paint it, make a new one, or just put that one back on it, see what I end up doing there. But I may end up having to take this off to get to those, but we'll see if I can just drop it all the way down. Next thing on the list of stuff to do is the belt housing and also the part that holds the motor. So there's a long screw with a long bushing on it. I don't really know why, to be honest. I think it's just to make it a little bit easier to adjust the belt tension without having to take off the front cover, because you'll see later that you can kind of get access to it, but just a little bit weird if you ask me, because it's 4 screws to take out the, I don't know. Anyway, so there's 2 screws that hold this on, 2 bolts that hold this on. One over here in a slot that can rotate, and then obviously this one in the middle. And the reason that this can rotate is because this is how you set the belt tension. The next piece here goes on the back, and that is for mounting the motor on. And again, this is kind of the same sort of a deal where these can move around wherever you want within these slotted areas. So that allows for the adjustment for the motor. All right, next up, I'm going to get the bottom pulley installed. And here's that bottom pulley. It's a 3 groove, so there's actually 3 belts that run on this. And I mean, it's a much larger shaft diameter on the end of the cutter head than there is on the motor. So it's pretty easy to tell which one goes where, but it's the smaller one that goes on the cutter head. And there is a key that goes in place there. And then there's a heavy washer and a bolt that goes on there. And then I've got an original belt, which measured in at 27 inches. But then I've also got a pair of new belts to try. One of them measured at, the dimensions of it were 26 and a half. And then the dimensions on the other one was 27 3/4. So I'll have to try these out and just see if any of these will work. And go from there, I guess. Okay. Now we are up to the motor, which is not all that light. That goes through there. And then we've got some nuts and bolts that'll hold that in place. I'm gonna just do these finger tight for now because I might have to adjust which way, or I might have to adjust the motor forward and back to get the pulleys aligned. So for now, I'm just going to get these on there so I don't have to worry about it falling off by doing something stupid. It happens on occasion. And then we can get the other pulley installed and go from there. So, just like everything else, this also has a key, and the pulley goes on there. And unlike the bottom one that's held in place with the key and a bolt from the end, this one actually has two set screws. One that just tightens against the shaft, and then one that tightens against the key. So there's one, you can kind of see it there, and then there's one 90 degrees opposed to it there. So make sure you get those tightened down.
And I suppose it would probably be a little bit easier if you did it before installing the motor, but where's the fun in that?
Something with a straight enough edge for me. Yeah, and see, like that, I'm way off on that, so I got to move the motor back. Keep it going. Before you ask, yes, the pulley is seated all the way. All right, I'm going to start with that and go from there. Seems to be pretty close so far. Now we will see if we can get these guys on there, or if we'll have to, yeah, definitely gonna have to change the tensioning on that a little. Now we've got a cover plate, and this does have a specific way. This is slanted, and you kind of just line it up with that. And this is what I was talking about before, like, so you can access this bolt if you need to tilt it, but I'm not exactly sure why you would need to tilt it, unless it's just for, like, changing the knives or something. Actually, you know what, now that I think about it, that must be it. So when you go to change the knives on this thing, or in my case, carbide inserts, I'm pretty sure that's what that's for. So you could just loosen this one, loosen that one, tilt it forward without screwing up your belt tension, and then you can go ahead and change the knives if you need to and get good access to the cutter head. So that's what that was for. So then there's this little spring that holds down the chip deflector. So that just goes on here. Again, 2 more little bolts that go through that. Okay, so now I've got the switch partially disassembled because there is a hole here and a hole here that this bracket screws into. So in order to get to those, I had to take off part of the switch. I didn't disconnect it or anything because I don't really have to do that. I just have to be able to access the screws enough to be able to get it in there. So that's what I'm doing now. Then I can go ahead and put this back together. And I thought I had an in-between size for this, but I seem to be mistaken. So this is a little bit too large of a little loop here, but essentially this just goes through, or around, I guess, the power cord to kind of keep it from getting tangled into anything. And now I should note that this will have to come out because the top plate that kind of goes over here uses this screw. So this will be removed and then put back in order to install the top chip chute, I guess, the top panel. So that'll come out, so I'm not too worried about it for now, but I just wanted to get it there so I don't forget about it, even though, like I said, I do kind of need to get a smaller one. So with that, I think I should probably plug it in and fire it. It's actually way quieter than I thought it would be. I mean, obviously I haven't run any wood through it yet, but I mean, just running it. Actually, you know what? We'll just go take a field trip over to my other planer, and without running any wood through that, I'll just fire that thing up and let you hear just how loud that thing is. Okay, so this is my Parks 12-inch planer, and that's what the 15-inch over there is going to be replacing. So let's fire this one up and we can just compare how loud this one is. So I mean, that's not to say that this is a bad planer or that I don't like it, because I do actually like this planer. It's done pretty well for me, and I don't really have any major complaints. The only thing is that the price was right on that one, and it's wider and can do more height-wise. So I guess it was a pretty easy decision to say, yeah, I'll take it. And this one will end up going up for sale because I don't really think I have a use for 2 planers kicking around. Once the cutter head stuff is situated, there is what I can only describe as a chip breaker, I'm assuming, similar to like a chip breaker or a cab iron on a hand plane. So this is a Grizzly replacement off of their website for one of their machines. and I just had to kind of ease the corners a little bit. It was more kind of straight line on the sides. I just kind of had to clip a little bit off. Might be because of the quality of the casting or lack thereof on my machine, but I mean, it fit either way. Otherwise, you could always make your own too. What this one had originally come with was like a little chipboard piece that had been kind of cut in the right size with the right holes and stuff for it. And then there's a bevel on the inside edge down there. So the idea behind this is you set it about as close to the cutter head as you can get without actually hitting it. And it'll be a way for the chips to get deflected up and out of the machine. And then there's just 3 bolts that hold that in place up here. I'm replacing these, most of these with, they used to just be hex bolts, and I'm going with these like socket cap. I guess they're not socket cap, they're button head. Just because, 1, I like them a little bit more, and 2, it should help to be just a little bit less of a spot for chips and stuff to get caught up on when they are exiting the machine. So next thing that I'm going to do is I've got 2 pieces of the dust chute or chip chute or whatever you want to call it, and I've added some of this foam like gasket tape type stuff. And so the original, when I had it first disassembled, had a piece here, so it was kind of like it was a different kind of foam. It was more of a spongy type foam that went across here, and that'll ride on the chip deflector inside the machine. But I just decided to add it all the way around the outside of where the screw holes are, just to see if I can cut down a little bit on any of the metal vibration or anything like that. I mean, I don't think it'll hurt anything. It squishes down pretty far. So, and then I just added some similar pieces on this part to effectively do the same, I hope. So these 2 I'm going to put together because there's 3 screws up here that go through there, and I don't think I want to try and do that by going through here to try and hold the nut while I'm doing all that. So I'm going to take care of that now. First I'm going to do here is the one that holds power cord. Alright, so there was the one shared screw from, or shared bolt from the power cord clamp, and then there's one back here in this corner, kind of behind the motor and in front of the pillar here. And then there's this one back here. And then there's one up here. Oops. And then there's 3 across the back here. One finishing touch is to put all of the rubber post caps on. One for each of the posts that doesn't have the handwheel. And now, I think we wheel it over to where I can hook it up to the dust collector and run some stuff through it. I will say one thing for sure, it is going to be a little bit different from my old one because with my Parks planer, it was actually up a lot higher. You can kind of maybe see it out there in the background. And so it was able to, for the most part, clear my table saw outfield, my table saw outfeed table. And so for, I mean, most of the work I did anything that was under about 2 inches, 2.5 inches, I could usually be able to plane it without having to move it out of its little spot right here, where I used to be able to just send it right through, come out over top of the outfeed table, and then a lot of times I would just pull it off the planer, shove it off to the side, leave it on the outfeed table, and just keep running through stuff. I would stack stuff up over here on the wing of the radial arm saw stand and just kind of repeat, bounce from over on the outfeed table to over on the radial arm saw, just back and forth as I fed stock through. But this one, not a chance that's going to happen. I mean, the table is way, way lower, so gonna have to either figure out some slight rearranging and figure out how I'm going to do that, or I might just end up having to, pull it out like this and just run it that direction. And when the camera's not here, I can actually angle it so it's basically parallel to the wall instead of pointing, kind of underneath the joiner wing. But I just want to get it set up, hooked up to some dust collection, and we shall run a board through it. Alright, so obviously this is it. I got the mobile base in and I put a little piece of plywood down there and painted that the same color as the planer. And I got a new badge, so I did end up getting that badge. It is a replacement that is pretty much a carbon copy. The only difference is the other one was kind of a metallic and this is sort of a vinyl printed on a piece of aluminum. And it was done by somebody that I actually found through somebody else's post on Facebook, but it's somebody that shares a lot of the stuff on Instagram, so I'll throw his name up here on the screen for you. Anybody that's interested, you can try and contact him through that. It was pretty reasonable and pretty easy to work with. We had a little bit of a misstep, so I've actually got a second one up here over on the wall, and not exactly sure what happened, but it ended up being a little bit too big. It was wide enough, but it was too tall, and so anyway, got the second one here, got the drive screws for that. I decided to paint that depth of cut indicator right there the same color as the chip breaker, Alice Chalmers orange, and got that installed. When you lower down the cutter head in the top assembly far enough, it was pretty easy to access that to be able to get those drive screws in there and get that thing installed. And then after that, there's just two little screws in the top and bottom here. So there's one up here, and then there's one somewhere down around in here, so you're gonna have to raise it a little bit. But I essentially just made a bunch of cuts on a board, eventually found, exactly where it was dimension-wise, and then you just kind of move that sliding scale on the post until it lines up correctly, and that was it. Pretty easy. One final piece to this were the knobs. There was two locking knobs, one here and then one on the opposite corner, for kind of locking this in place, and I was missing one of those, and a buddy of mine was actually able to make me a set, and so now I've got that all buttoned up as well, and that was pretty much the final piece for this thing. And now there she stands. Everything else is rocking. I've been using this thing for a couple of months now, off and on, and it is really, really nice, and I am pretty dang happy with it. Alright, so that's the planer all put back together. It was actually not as bad as I thought it would be. I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into. There were a lot of unknowns with that gearbox. There was kind of a lot of things going on in there, and eventually I did end up deciding, obviously, to just go all out and just restore the whole thing, all the bearings, all the paint, do all that, just because I was in it that far to get all that stuff cleaned up anyway, so I just figured, why not? Obviously, what you choose is up to you, but I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. I think it'll be a pretty good planer. I've been using it a little bit so far, and I'm very, very happy with that LuxCut 3 cutter head. That was pretty easy to install. I just had that one little hiccup with the spline gear that I showed you earlier, and other than that, everything else was perfect. So getting that installed was super easy, as long as you remember the order of things, so pay attention. And other than that, I'm just really excited. So the next thing will be to make sure that I've got a permanent home for that. Not exactly sure where it'll live. Again, I kind of mentioned like the infeed outfeed rollers, or the infeed outfeed table rather, on that planer is a lot lower than on my old planer, which is fine, but means the old planer I was able to shoot it out over the outfeed of the table saw. This one I can't really do that, so I'll probably have to figure out either if I'm going to leave it there and just move it every time I use it so that it clears the outfeed table, or if I try to reconfigure some stuff to get in a different location. But that's all, you know, not something that has to do with the restoration, so we'll see how that goes later. And other than that, I appreciate those of you that watched through this whole thing. I know there was quite a few videos. This one was pretty long, and as always, I will catch you in the next one.